In Alabasta, Ace once asked Luffy to join the Whitebeard pirates. But what if Luffy had said yes? If the Straw Hats sailed under Whitebeard's flag, would Marineford still happen, or would an even greater war take its place? How different would the One Piece story change? The journey through the Grand Line had already tested the crew many times before reaching Alabasta. Luffy and his friends had traveled across dangerous seas, battled strong enemies, and gained both allies and rivals. From Logue Town to Reverse Mountain, they had crossed into the unpredictable waters of the Grand Line. They fought powerful hunters on Little Garden and escaped the schemes of Mr. 3. They also met Vivi, the Princess of Alabasta, and promised to help her free her country from the control of Crocodile and Baroque works. By the time they reached the Desert Kingdom, the crew was already tired from endless battles, but they pushed forward. The kingdom was in chaos, and Crocodile's influence grew stronger. It was at this time that Luffy reunited with someone from his past, his brother, Porcus D. Ace. Ace was chasing Blackbeard, but in Alabasta, he crossed paths with Luffy. Their meeting was brief at first, but it showed the crew another side of their captain. Luffy was excited to see his brother, while the crew was surprised to learn he even had one. That moment became more serious when Ace started fighting against Smoker, the Marine captain who had been chasing Luffy since Logue Town. As Ace clashed with Smoker, the Straw Hat crew rushed to escape. Smoker's smoke filled the area, and Ace's flames burned against it, creating waves of heat and smoke that spread across the city. During the escape, Nami glanced at Luffy and asked if Ace was really his brother. Luffy, smiling as usual, confirmed it and told her his name. While the others ran forward, Luffy slowed down, watching the battle between Ace and Smoker with interest. When they reached a split in the road, Nami shouted for everyone to follow her, but Luffy chose another path without hesitation. The crew reached the Going Merry and began unloading the supplies they had carried. Once everything was secured, they looked around and quickly realized Luffy was missing. Meanwhile, Luffy sat on top of one of the barrels he had been carrying, resting in an alley. He looked around, but could not figure out where his crew had gone. The streets had grown quieter now that most civilians had run away from the chaos. Dust drifted in the air, and the sounds of Ace's battle still echoed in the distance. From above, Ace appeared standing on the roof of a nearby house. He jumped down, landing lightly in front of Luffy. Ace walked over, and the two brothers had a small chat before Ace finally made Luffy an offer. He told Luffy he should bring his crew and join the Whitebeard pirates. Whitebeard was the strongest man in the world, and his crew was like a family. Luffy paused, thinking about it. He had always dreamed of forming his own crew and reaching the top on his own, but the idea of being with Ace again and fighting under the same flag was tempting. After a moment of thought, he gave a small nod of agreement, and that's when his fate would begin to change. Perhaps this was the best way of reaching his real dream? Ace was overjoyed at the decision. From that moment on, Ace decided to stay with Luffy and help him with the battle in Alabasta. Ace temporarily postponed his hunt for Blackbeard, hoping that helping Luffy in Alabasta would still align with Whitebeard's orders. After all, Crocodile was a warlord abusing his power, which could also threaten Whitebeard's territory. With Ace at their side and giving full support, the later battles became much easier, especially the one against Crocodile. While Luffy battled the warlord directly, Ace destroyed Crocodile's forces and broke through the walls of his base. The two brothers combined their strength, but Luffy was defeated during his first round. Ace didn't take that lying down and eventually overpowered the sand-based Logia user. With Crocodile out for the count, Alabasta was finally freed. After the battle, the crew gathered again on the Going Merry. They were tired, but they celebrated their victory quietly, knowing the kingdom was safe again. It was then that Luffy stood before them and shared his decision. He told them about Ace's offer and that he wanted the Straw Hats to join the Whitebeard pirates. The crew was shocked. Each had joined Luffy to chase their own dreams. At first, the idea of joining someone else's crew felt like betrayal. The idea of joining another crew seemed against everything they had believed so far. But Luffy was serious, and Luffy believed that this would be a way they could fulfill their dreams even quicker. He explained it in his own way, and although some of them argued at first, his passion and trust eventually made them listen. They remembered how Ace had fought beside them, how his flames had saved them in battle, and how strong he truly was. Whitebeard was known across the seas as the strongest pirate alive, and being under his flag would grant them protection and even allow them to grow stronger. Slowly, each crew member thought about it and began to understand Luffy's choice. Although they were still unsure of what this would mean for their individual dreams, they decided to follow Luffy as they always had. Their captain had made his decision, and they wouldn't be the ones overthrowing it. The Straw Hats, one by one, accepted the plan to join the Whitebeard pirates. With that decision, their path began to change. The crew no longer sailed forward only under their own flag, but now looked toward joining one of the greatest forces on the sea. The bond between Luffy and Ace became the bridge that would connect the Straw Hats to Whitebeard's family. But before that, they had to deal with a few things. Ace told Luffy that there was a man named Blackbeard who had betrayed Whitebeard's crew, and Ace had been tracking him ever since. From his information, Blackbeard was bound for Bonaro Island in a few weeks, and Ace made it clear that this mission came first. So Luffy agreed to follow him. During this time, Nico Robin, who had once been their enemy in Alabasta, secretly stowed away on the Straw Hat ship. She had nowhere else to go, and though her intentions were not clear at first, she quietly began helping the crew. It didn't take long for Luffy and the others to accept her, and Robin became the newest member of their growing family. Their next destination was the mysterious island in the sky Skypiea, the Straw Hats were supposed to use the Going Merry to get to the Sky Island. But with Ace around, he simply used his powers to carry them up to avoid damage to the ship. Ace himself decided to remain behind near the base of the Sky Path. He wanted to guard the Going Merry while also letting Luffy grow stronger alone. He didn't want to hinder their progress. In Skypiea, Luffy and his friends clashed against the self-proclaimed god Enel. With his lightning powers, Enel was unlike any enemy they had faced. The battle raged across the White Seas and Cloud Islands, and though it was long and exhausting, Luffy's determination and his crew's teamwork carried them through. The tyrant was struck down, and Skypiea was freed from his rule. Meanwhile, Ace repaired small damages to the ship and burned away hostile sea creatures that drew too close. When the crew finally descended from the sky, they found the Merry safe and Ace waiting with a grin. Their journey pressed on toward Water 7, the city of shipwrights. Here, the Straw Hats crossed paths with Frankie, a brash and eccentric cyborg who first appeared as their enemy, but slowly revealed his good heart. While the crew became entangled in the city's struggles, Ace once again stood as their shield. The threat of CP9 soon emerged. These agents of the world government pursued Robin, determined to drag her back into their control. But Ace coming over made the agents think again. Ace was notorious as the Fire Fist and commander of one of Whitebeard's divisions, and the agents knew how strong he was. If Luffy had aligned himself with an emperor, then that meant Robin and Frankie would be untouchable. They were strong, but they knew better than to start a war against the Whitebeard pirates without permission. For the first time, CP9 hesitated. While they were confident in their mission, engaging a division of the Whitebeard pirates would require authorization from the higher-ups, so they chose to monitor Robin in secret rather than trigger a premature war. Robin still felt the weight of her past pressing down on her. Yet now, she was surrounded by people who stood firm beside her. She was never captured, and the crew never had to go to an all-out war to rescue her. So their bond slowly grew as she felt that she didn't need to hide all the time anymore. Frankie, too, was quick to join because of Luffy, and that meant the crew now had an amazing shipwright. With their crew larger and more united than before, Ace led them onward. It was about to be time for Blackbeard to show up, and so their next destination was Banaro Island. Luffy had agreed to follow him into the world of Whitebeard, and this meant standing with him through his battles. As the Straw Hats trained and grew on the journey, Ace's presence pushed them further. Zoro sparred against him, learning how to sharpen his reflexes against a Logia type, and Ace even taught them how to begin using Haki over the course of their journey. All of them began picking it up, but Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji were the quickest to learn, and soon the crew got close to Banaro. The sea around it seemed restless, as though stirred by the clash that was destined to unfold upon its shores. The crew readied themselves, knowing that Ace's fight was near. For the first time since agreeing to join Whitebeard, the Straw Hats understood the weight of the world they had stepped into. This was no longer just about adventure and discovery. It was about standing with the strongest crew in the seas, and that meant facing enemies who were equally strong. The crew reached the island and went towards a village, and then they waited for the Blackbeard pirates to show up. And he did! Blackbeard entered the village after wreaking havoc along the island, and Ace made his presence known. Blackbeard was there, standing broad and calm, his twisted grin stretching as he spotted Ace. His crew was beside him. Jesus Burgess, huge like a walking fortress, and Van Augur with his rifle resting across his shoulder. The Straw Hats stayed behind Ace at first as Ace stepped forward, and flames Van Augur was the first to shoot, but his bullet simply passed through Ace, and the fight began. The Straw Hats went for the Blackbeard pirates, while Ace fought Blackbeard himself. The first clash was between fire and darkness. Ace threw a storm of flames, a wave that lit the air in an orange glow. Blackbeard countered by drawing it in, his darkness swallowing the blaze like a void. The two forces pressed against each other, but Ace pushed through, the fire surging again. Burgess charged forward like a bull, fists swinging heavy enough to crush walls. Zoro stepped in to meet him, swords flashing. Burgess blocked one strike with his arm guard before throwing a punch that sent Zoro sliding across the dirt. Sanji was there in an instant with his leg wreathed in flame as it clashed against Burgess's chest plate. The impact rang like steel against steel. Burgess staggered but didn't fall, swinging wildly as Zoro returned to slice from the other side. Meanwhile, Van Augur raised his rifle. His shots were swift and precise, but Usopp answered from behind cover, his slingshot sending trick shots that forced Augur to move. Nami joined in to distract him along with Luffy, while Robin's arms sprouted across the ground to pull at his legs, forcing him to stumble when he tried to find a clean shot. But the center of the fight was Ace and Blackbeard. Fire raged against darkness in bursts that shook the island. Every strike left the ground torn open. Every counter spread shadows that tried to drag Ace in. Blackbeard's power was overwhelming, drawing everything into his grasp, yet Ace refused to be swallowed. But he realized that Blackbeard nullifying his flames was getting incredibly hard to deal with, and Blackbeard's strength and durability weren't anything to take lightly. Luffy couldn't hold himself back as he saw Ace being pushed back. He left Van Augur to the rest and launched forward with significant speed in gear second. His speed blurred, and he struck at Blackbeard's side. side. The blow landed hard, the force cracking stone, but Blackbeard only staggered before pulling Luffy in with his darkness. Before the void could close, Ace's flames cut through as he used a hockey-coated fist to free his brother. Luffy spun around and launched Gear Third, his fist ballooning into a massive strike. The punch collided with Blackbeard's guard, sending shockwaves through the air. Blackbeard was pushed back, his laughter breaking into a grunt as he slid across the stone. The Straw Hats pressed the advantage. Zoro and Sanji fought in rhythm against Burgess, cutting and striking in tandem until he fell back, armor dented and bleeding. Though Burgess was a tank, the duo used coordination to keep him off balance. Burgess swung one last heavy strike, but Zoro's blades crossed and blocked it, while Sanji's kicks sent him sprawling across the ground. Usopp's shots distracted Augur just long enough for Frankie to land a direct hit, which threw the pirate back into the ground. Robin quickly took advantage of that and tied Augur up with her limbs, taking him out of the battle. For a moment, it actually looked like the battle was turning. Luffy stood beside Ace, and the two brothers unleashed a combined assault with Luffy's Gear Third, while Ace covered his brother with massive firepower. But Blackbeard was stronger than anything Luffy had ever faced. The ground around him cracked open, darkness spilling wider. The air itself seemed to collapse inward, dragging everything close. Luffy was pulled off balance, his giant fist shrinking as the void gripped him. Ace's flames were swallowed too, and Blackbeard caught Luffy with a crushing punch, sending him crashing into the rubble. Ace's heart pounded. He saw the danger, the risk his brother was in. Even with the Straw Hats fighting at their best, Blackbeard's darkness was too strong. The air grew heavy with pressure, like the island itself might sink into that black void. Ace grabbed Luffy, flames wrapping around them both as he pushed back with everything he had left. A fiery explosion erupted, forcing Blackbeard to shield himself with his darkness. The blast gave Ace the opening he needed. He carried Luffy, signaling the Straw Hats to retreat. Ace gritted his teeth. He hated running, but this was about survival. Zoro and Sanji struck together one last time and forced Burgess back to the ground, so the crew could regroup before retreating toward the shoreline as Ace gave them cover. Blackbeard laughed as the flames faded in the distance, but there was anger in his eyes. He had been pushed further than expected, and Burgess and Augur were wounded. He watched as his prey escaped. On the ship, Luffy lay exhausted, but alive. Ace sat beside him, but his thoughts were on Blackbeard. He knew now, Blackbeard's power was beyond what he had imagined. Facing him directly risked everything, especially Luffy's life and maybe his own. As the ship sailed onward, Ace clenched his fists. He had failed, but his brother was more important. The time to meet Whitebeard had come. The crew traveled and finally reached the Moby deck, where they soon stood before the towering figure of Edward Newgate, the man known as Whitebeard. Even with the IVs attached to him and sitting on his massive seat, his presence alone felt like an ocean, bearing down, heavy and endless, a force of nature that dwarfed even the bravest pirate. For Luffy, however, it was not fear that welled up in his chest, but excitement. He declared his dream, unflinching under the Emperor's gaze. Whitebeard, curious about the fire in the boy's eyes, loudly laughed and told Ace that the boy reminded him of Ace when he first came here. A subtle quake in the air rattled the ground beneath him, which caused Chopper and Usopp to jump up in panic. Ace then talked to Whitebeard. Blackbeard's power had been unlike anything he had encountered before, an ability that could pull in even the mightiest flames and snuff them out like a candle. He described the crushing force of the darkness and how it nullified his devil fruits, and even with the Straw Hats, they were unable to beat the man. They could only barely retreat. Whitebeard listened in silence, pipe smoldering in hand. When Ace finished, the Emperor nodded slowly, acknowledging both the danger and the growth of his son. Then his gaze turned to Luffy and the Straw Hats. The boy's reckless determination reminded him of another era, another pirate who once bore the same fire. But dreams were not achieved on will alone. This crew needed strength if they were to stand with the Whitebeard pirates. Whitebeard ordered the Straw Hats to train under himself and his commanders, and so it began. Zoro trained under Vista, drawn by his graceful swordsmanship, which helped Zoro refine his own hockey-coated strikes. The master swordsman could stand against the strongest swordsman in the world. Each spar tested Zoro's limits, forcing him to refine not only his technique, but his control over armament hockey. Day after day, the two clashed, sparks flying as Zoro pushed through failure after failure. Sanji found himself under the watchful eye of Marco, the Phoenix. The two could not have been more different, yet Marco's resilience and mastery of aerial combat offered Sanji a new way to expand his fighting style. He began learning how to use Soru and expanded on his observation hockey. The others too found mentors among Whitebeard's crew. Usopp learned from sharpshooters, while Nami absorbed knowledge from navigators who had charted the unpredictable seas of the New World, her grasp of weather manipulation sharpening into something formidable. Chopper learned from the ship's doctors, while Robin honed her own devil fruit and gathered knowledge. Even Frankie found inspiration among the shipwrights, adapting their engineering expertise to refine his own creations. And then there was Ace. Though already one of Whitebeard's strongest commanders, his battle against Blackbeard had humbled him. He pushed himself harder than ever, training not just his flames, but his hockey, forcing his body and mind to adapt against the kind of nullification Blackbeard wielded. For 2 years, he fought spar after spar, his control reaching levels he had never before considered possible. Luffy, though, was the one who caught everyone's eyes. Whitebeard tested him on a regular basis and personally taught him how to use greater forms of hockey and how to refine his conqueror's hockey. The boy's gear second and third grew sharper under the constant trials, his body adapting to withstand the strain. His haki, once raw and uncontrolled, began to bloom under the pressures of battle. Though reckless, his growth was undeniable. Whitebeard found himself silently impressed, even amused at the idea that this boy might someday truly shake the world. While the Straw Hats trained, the seas outside shifted in strange ways. In this timeline, there was no Great War, and the Whitebeard pirates still stood strong. There was no breakout in the prison, so Blackbeard was unable to get his band of criminal crewmates. And with no one having gone to stop him, Gecko Moria continued building up his forces to get revenge on Kaido. Unfortunately, though, Brook never met Luffy, and so he continued to drift until his fate would change its course. In this world, Brook's fate remained unchanged, adrift, waiting for salvation that never came. Without Ace's capture and Whitebeard's death, the chain of chaos that would have engulfed the seas did not erupt. Blackbeard, denied the opportunity to carve his legend from Whitebeard's corpse, took longer to worm his way into the Seven Warlords. He remained in the shadows, scheming, recruiting, and gathering strength in quieter ways. 2 years passed in this altered world. The Straw Hats, once a young and reckless crew, emerged as hardened warriors, their bonds unshaken and their power sharpened to terrifying edges. Ace, now stronger than ever, stood not only as Whitebeard's son, but as his own man, prepared for the storm he knew was coming. While the world's focus remained on the Whitebeard pirates' expansion, Teach carved his empire out of shadows. He continued claiming bits and pieces of territory while gathering other scum in his ranks. But now the Straw Hats were ready. With their training done, Luffy stood among the strongest members of Whitebeard's forces. The team was strong enough to go toe-to-toe with the commanders, and as such, Whitebeard made Luffy the commander of his own division. The Straw Hats then continued their journey after training, crossing the seas under Whitebeard's blessing. Meanwhile, Ace, now having mastered his devil fruit, went after Blackbeard once more, thinking he'd call the others for help once he finally narrowed down the villain's location. The Straw Hat division went to Sabaody. They crushed Marines who dared oppose them, their new strength on full display. When they descended into the depths toward Fishman Island, the crew stood united against Hody Jones and his forces. It was a swift, decisive clash, and Luffy's conquerors Haki alone broke the backbone of Hody's army, while Zoro and Sanji dismantled his lieutenants without struggle. Chopper went in like a bull with his monster point and shattered enemy ranks, while Frankie's weapons blasted through entire squadrons. When Luffy finally clashed against Hody, it was no contest. His base form alone was enough to send Hody crashing through layers of coral, unconscious. Fishman Island cheered, their saviors stronger and prouder than ever. They continued on their adventure when word suddenly came. Ace had finally narrowed down Teach's location to Hachinosu, the pirate paradise. He sent word to Luffy's division and to Whitebeard himself. It was not simply about revenge anymore. It was about ending a threat that could consume the world itself. Blackbeard had grown too strong, his ambitions unchecked, and his forces swelling. Whitebeard thought for a moment and decided that it was time to go after the villain before he got even stronger. So he sent some of his forces headed by Marco. The Straw Hats prepared at once. They were leagues stronger than their last encounter with Blackbeard, and this time they weren't rookies. Now they were warriors who carried the will of Whitebeard, the spirit of the sea, and the future of freedom itself. Their sails turned toward Hachinosu, toward the clash of fire and darkness, toward Blackbeard. The storm was about to break. The sea boiled with chaos as Ace's division, Marco and Luffy, joined outside on the seas near Hachinosu. They gathered up before unfurling Whitebeard's flags and descended upon Hachinosu. From the coast, Blackbeard's men roared defiance, the island's jagged cliffs bristling with cannons and cutthroats eager to prove their worth. But this time, the tides were different. Ace, Marco, and Luffy led together, and soon the pirates landed on the shore. The attack began like thunder. Cannons from the fleet ripped through the shoreline fortifications, and Whitebeard pirates stormed the rocky beaches. Zoro, blades flashing with haki-coated arcs, cut down swaths of defenders, while Sanji blurred through the air with sky flames on his heels, dropping foes like meteors. Usopp's shots streaked across the battlefield with deadly precision, each impact dismantling enemy formations. The Straw Hats scattered across the island like wildfire, each meeting an enemy eager to tear them apart. Marco himself attacked from the air, taking out enemies left and right. Jesus Burgess bellowed as he lunged forward, chest broad as a fortress wall. His fist crashed down toward Luffy's crew, but Zoro intercepted, blades clashing against knuckles harder than iron. The shockwaves split the ground beneath him, sending rocks flying. Burgess had become stronger, but Zoro was in a league of his own. Meanwhile, Sanji supported Marco as he went after another elite. Van Augur, calm as death itself, perched on a rooftop with his rifle. His shots snapped like vipers, but Sanji saw the glint from the sky and dived toward the sniper. Even Usopp realized the position and began firing toward him. The duel became a storm of long-range death before Sanji swooped in and began overpowering Van Augur. Chopper was tearing through the battlefield as Frankie showered fodder with his lasers and weapons. Robin's wings of hands tore through the ambushers, trying to flank the Straw Hats. But at the heart of the chaos were Luffy and Ace once again as they went after Blackbeard. Blackbeard emerged from the smoke, his laugh heavy with menace, his body cloaked in writhing shadows. The Yami Yami no Mi pulsed around him, an abyss pulling at the very fabric of the island. His grin widened when he saw Ace. Ace answered with fire so bright it made the heavens blaze. His body radiated with the heat of the Logia, flames dancing like molten waves across his arms and the ground around him. They burned almost white, and he thrust both hands forward, summoning a tide of fire so dense it resembled the core of a sun. Blackbeard roared and dragged his hand through the air, darkness swallowing the inferno whole, but it was clear that it was having a slightly harder time nullifying the massive attack, and Ace's speed had grown sharper, his haki cutting through the gravitational pull of the dark as he blitzed forward, his fist blazing with armament haki, and drove it straight into Blackbeard's chest. The impact launched Teach back into the ruins, a crater opening beneath him. He got back up and continued fighting. The battle was intense and went on for quite a while as they beat each other up with massive attacks. But Blackbeard's laughter didn't stop. He stood, bleeding but smiling, his darkness swirling around him. Ace wasn't the only one who had gotten stronger. His gravity spiked, pulling Ace toward him. Shadows wrapped around Ace's body, dragging the fire down into suffocation until Luffy appeared. Gear Second ignited in a blur of steam, Luffy's body flickering across the battlefield. He smashed into Blackbeard's jaw with a haki-coated jet pistol, the strike snapping the man's head sideways and forcing him to stumble. He followed immediately with Gear Third, inflating his fist and coating it in armament haki before slamming it down like a hammer. The ground collapsed beneath Blackbeard as the giant blow rocked him into the earth, but Blackbeard's gravity lashed back, swallowing the momentum. Darkness coiled around Luffy's arm, dragging him forward into Blackbeard's counterstrike. A devastating punch to Luffy's chest sent him hurtling through walls of stone, blood spraying into the dust. Ace's fury boiled over. Flames surged like an ocean storm, turning the battlefield into a furnace. He struck with pillars of fire shaped like divine spears, flaming constructs roaring with heat so hot they warped the air. Still, Blackbeard endured, his darkness swallowing, smothering, and countering. His roars shook the battlefield, gravity crushing everything in range. Meanwhile, Luffy was in a crater when his chest began to thump loudly, a sound like drum beats. The atmosphere around him began to change, and even Blackbeard and Ace noticed that something was happening. Luffy's body began to glow and his hair turned white. Then he started floating upward, white smoke and brilliance bursting outward, drums of liberation echoing across the battlefield. His form was loose and cartoonish, yet it seemed to have some incredible power behind it. Gear 5 had awakened. The battlefield froze as the Straw Hats, Whitebeard's men, and even Blackbeard's forces stared in disbelief. Luffy leapt, his body bending impossibly, the ground bouncing beneath his feet like rubber. His fist stretched cartoonishly massive and slammed down on Blackbeard with a force that rippled reality. Blackbeard's darkness struggled to consume the attack, but Luffy's Conqueror's haki exploded outward, bending the shadows themselves and slamming Blackbeard through the cliffs. Ace joined him, their flames and power twisting together. Ace conjured a sun above his palm. The awakened flame pulsed like a miniature star. Luffy bounded forward, fists blazing. Together, they unleashed an attack so monumental it seemed to tear the island itself apart. Sun and Freedom united against a massive sphere of darkness. The explosion rattled the seas for miles, and then Blackbeard staggered from the smoke, body broken, blood gushing. For all his darkness, Ace and Luffy had hit him with too much strength. His final attempt to drag them into his abyss ended in futility as their combined Conqueror's haki burst through, shattering his shadows. Ace's flames engulfed him as Luffy went in for another hit that blasted Blackbeard back into the ground where he lay silent, his darkness unraveling into nothing. The battlefield fell into stunned silence. The Straw Hats, battered but alive, regrouped beside Ace. The Whitebeard pirates raised their weapons high, victorious at last, and the other criminals began to quickly retreat from the island as they saw their captain fall. Hachinosu burned. Its reign of darkness ended. For Ace, it wasn't just revenge, it was freedom. And with Luffy at his side, the world now knew that fire and freedom together could scorch even the deepest shadows. The seas trembled after the fall of Blackbeard. The Whitebeard pirates, once considered to be a crew with a dying captain, now stood taller and prouder than ever. Ace, with his awakened flames that could scorch the heavens, became a living symbol of the crew's future. Luffy began refining his Conqueror's haki under Whitebeard's guidance. Though still raw, it grew stronger with every clash and now stood as a division commander, recognized as the spark that reignited the legacy of the old era. But peace was never meant for pirates. One evening aboard Moby Deck, Sanji received a letter that made him pale. It carried the seal of the Vinsmoke family, one he had hoped never to see again. The words were brief and cruel. He was to be married to one of Big Mom's daughters, a union meant to secure an alliance between the Vinsmokes and the Yonko. His refusal, the letter threatened, would endanger Zeph and the Barati. Sanji tried to hide it, but he wasn't fast enough as Robin caught on. She tried to dissuade Sanji from going, saying that Big Mom wouldn't dare, but Sanji told her his history and that he was originally a prince. He couldn't oppose them because it might still mean the end of the Barati. Sanji left quickly without saying a word to anyone else, and Robin broke the news to Luffy and the gang before sending a message to Whitebeard. The air grew heavy as Whitebeard leaned forward on his throne-like seat on the deck. His voice rumbled like the earth itself as he read the message and declared in anger that Charlotte Linlin dared to lay her hand on his family. The commanders went silent. To call Sanji family was no small matter, but Whitebeard's words carried no hesitation. He raised his Bacento and planted it into the deck, the wood splintering under the weight. Whitebeard got up and declared that if she wished to chain one of his own, then he would remind her why he was known as an emperor. The declaration spread like wildfire. The world reeled at the news. Whitebeard, the strongest man alive, was marching against another Yonko. Big Mom, however, was not cowed. From her throne in Tatoland, her laughter echoed across the sea. She called her children, armies, and fleets, but she also did something unexpected. She reached out to Kaido. The sea held its breath. Two emperors joining hands hadn't happened in decades. The two emperors had once been allies in the days of rocks. Their alliance, rekindled in the face of Whitebeard's declaration, shook the world to its core. She thought Whitebeard had weakened with age, but she wasn't going to risk a war without some backup. And what better backup than the emperor who owed her a favor for granting him the power of his devil fruit? The stage for war was set. The Whitebeard pirates versus the combined forces of Big Mom and Kaido. The Straw Hat division bristled with energy as they received word that Whitebeard himself would be joining them for the rescue mission. Ace readied himself as well, and so did the rest of the Whitebeard pirates. The new world was about to become a battlefield unlike any before, and in the halls of Mary Jawaz, the five elders gathered in silence, their worry hidden behind still faces. For the first time in decades, two emperors had joined hands, and standing against them was the only man who could oppose them so completely. This might end up being an absolute mess, but there was the chance that the emperors could simply wipe each other out, which would clear their own problems. So they let them fight. The massive fleet set sail for a war that would later be known as the Great Yonko War. Whitebeard led the fleet, and they soon reached Tato Island after joining up with the Straw Hats division. And soon, the fighting started. The sky over Tato Land burned with fire and smoke as the fleets of the Whitebeard pirates clashed against the combined forces of Big Mom and Kaido. Cannon fire exploded across the waters. Ships splintered like matchsticks, and waves roared like beasts, thrown by the sheer might of the opposing crews. The horizon was a battlefield of destruction, where the clash of two Yonko fleets shook the world. Whitebeard himself led the charge with Ace and Luffy's divisions right behind him. The Straw Hats, now seasoned under Whitebeard's training and their fight with Blackbeard, moved like a storm across the enemy's ships. Luffy was going through the air in Gear 4 as he went around breaking up Big Mom's weapons. Ace himself used his flames to set fire to entire squads around him. Zoro fought with Vista as the two went up against King and Queen. His swords flashed like lightning while Vista's rapier clashed with King. Sanji, partnered with Marco, unleashed fiery kicks that sent Big Mom's subordinates flying, while Marco's Phoenix Flames healed and shielded the allied crew from counterattacks. Jozu crushed enemy warships, and each commander was fighting with everything they had, even the massive Oars Jr. Above it all, Whitebeard himself stood like an absolute beast. His Basento tore through Kaido's minions, the shockwaves leveling islands, and his hockey-radiating presence forced even Big Mom to stagger back. Kaido lunged at him in his massive dragon form, but Whitebeard met him with his Basento, and the clash shook the entire island. The old legend matched Kaido blow for blow, while Big Mom unleashed her soul powers, summoning massive homies that rained destruction. But Whitebeard's crew, trained and strengthened, held the line with determination. In the center of the battlefield, Luffy and Ace faced off against Big Mom, leaving Whitebeard to deal with Kaido. Big Mom's massive strikes smashed through the ground beneath them, but Luffy ducked and twisted, activating Gear 5. Ace countered Big Mom's fire blasts, creating a combination that even the Yonko struggled to respond to. The two brothers moved in perfect rhythm, one covering the other, their attacks a storm of raw power and precision. The Straw Hats division was relentless. Chopper, in his heavy point form, smashed through the ranks of Kaido's soldiers, while Robin's limbs struck from unseen angles, immobilizing dangerous threats before they could act. The synergy of the Whitebeard pirates was unmatched, each member working with seamless coordination and devastating impact. Ace's flames ignited the sky, twisting and curling around Big Mom, but her brute force kept pushing forward. Luffy was jumping around and landing blow after blow, playing with Big Mom's homies like they were toys. The battle went on for quite some time as they kept exchanging blows, but it was clear that Big Mom was starting to slow down. Whitebeard himself was going all out against Kaido, and it was breaking apart the island. Soon enough, a massive quake split the battlefield, throwing enemy ships into chaos. Whitebeard surged forward, Basento slicing through Kaido's defenses with raw force. At the same time, Ace and Luffy gave it their all, just like in the battle with Blackbeard, and landed a final, massive blow. The two emperors fell at the same time, overpowered by a legend and the new generation. The battlefield fell silent as the smoke cleared. The sea was littered with wrecked ships, but the Whitebeard pirates stood tall. Each commander, from Marco to Vista, Jozu to Ace, bore the marks of battle, but their eyes shone with victory. Luffy had a proud grin on his face. Ace returned the smile, flames licking the edge of his body, his exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. In the aftermath, the Whitebeard pirates claimed new lands. Islands that had been under Kaido's control were now liberated, including Wano, and Big Mom's retreating forces were scattered. New allies, inspired by the strength and unity of Whitebeard's crew, pledged themselves to the Pirate King, swelling the ranks and turning the fleet into a force the world had never seen before. Ace and Luffy were celebrated not only as the flames and will behind the victory, but also as symbols of a new era. Whitebeard, standing at the helm, his voice echoing over the water, declared that the seas now belonged to those with the courage to fight. The crew cheered, and for the first time in decades, the Whitebeard pirates were more than just a legendary name. They were now the strongest crew in the world. The war had ended. ended, but the age of the Whitebeard pirates was only just beginning. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button for more One Piece videos.